Over the last few years, it has started to feel like Capcom and SNK are closer than ever, and we, their audience and consumers, mistakenly categorize them as enemies or even competitors, when maybe they really see themselves as collaborators and co-workers of the same genre, and they are just trying to evolve the fighting game genre together while also making fighting game fans happy. And we, over time, have become witnesses of this new conjunction of work, with the re-release of iconic games like Capcom vs SNK 2 in the last Capcom Fighting Collection, the re-release also of FGC Chaos, and the presence of Terry and Mai on Street Fighter 6, and the future presence of Ken and Chun-Li on Fatal Fury. And this new level of co-work basically has all fighting game fans reacting like this.
New challengers from the you.
And now is basically when we go back to the title. CVS 3 is absolutely inevitable. It's going to happen eventually with the level of collaboration that these two companies have been showing over the last few years. So in this video, we're gonna discuss basically what could be the future roster of this game. In the comment section also, of course, I wanna see what it is that you think could happen. And it's probably gonna take a while. So pause the video, grab a drink, grab some food, sit tight, and let's start with the future roster of Capcom vs SNK 3. But first, we need to set some ground rules. Rule number 1 is that we're gonna have the same number of fighters for Capcom and for SNK. The roster is going to be 40 characters at the base, and we're also gonna showcase some DLC seasons. The second rule is that we are also going to explore the roster of Capcom vs SNK 2 as the base model for basically the next iteration of the franchise. And probably not everyone is gonna come back. I just gotta say that. So now that we have those rules, we can basically start. Let's get into it. The first step for me would be to basically explore which are the public faces of both Capcom and SNK, because at the end of the day, both of these companies have games that are so old that it's very obvious which characters need to be present in any crossover that basically includes a game like Street Fighter, or for example, The King of Fighters or Fatal Fury. So I think that we all know that some characters need to be in the roster. And for Capcom, for example, we need characters like Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Guile, Zangief, and Cammy. I think that those characters have solidified themselves as the faces of Street Fighter and the public faces of Capcom as a brand when it comes to their fighting games. I think that if you don't have them all at the start, it's going to be a huge problem. And then for SNK, I would say that the same happens, and we have characters that also need to be at the start that are the faces of the company, like Kyo Kusanage, Iori Yagami, Terry Bogard, Mai Shiranui, and also maybe Haomaru and Geese. So I think that all these characters need to be present in the roster, and even if they tend to be DLC in other games, they just have to be in the base roster of a Capcom vs SNK game. It just needs to happen. And then I have a couple of characters for both Capcom and SNK that I think are also, basically the faces of a brand, but they tend to be DLC. For Capcom, for example, we have Akuma and Bison, and I think that they need to be a part of the base roster. Like, please stop with the Akuma DLC. And then for SNK, again, Geese also tends to be DLC, but also Kim Kapan and Rock Howard. I think that those characters are also the face of SNK as a brand, and they need to be in the base roster. So with all those characters for both the Capcom and SNK side, we have the base of the roster with all the public faces of each brand. Okay, now that we have basically the public faces of each brand chosen, I think that we need to move into talking about classic characters that need to make an appearance because maybe they have not received the love that they deserve over the last few years in both Capcom and SNK games, or they are very iconic and for some reason they don't tend to be a part of the base roster of other games. And for Capcom, I have 3 characters that I really think deserve a spot on the base roster of a very big game, but they have not gotten that. And these are Sagat, Vega, and Cody. to me, it was absolutely crazy when we saw the base roster for SF6 and Sagat and Vega were not there. Like, they really deserve to be on the base roster of a Street Fighter game, and they have not been present on that for a while. Like, they were not base roster on Street Fighter 5, and they are not base roster on SF6, which is kind of crazy if you ask me. So I think that they deserve a spot, you know, as classic characters, as iconic Capcom characters on the base roster of Capcom vs SNK 3. And then I also have Cody. I think that Cody is a very classic Capcom character that at the end of the day deserves a ton of love, but for some reason does not get it. Like, he's never on the base roster of the games, and he's super famous. Like, Cody is a very famous character, you know, present on Final Fight, Alpha series, and a lot of stuff. Just, I think that Cody also should be on the base roster for Capcom vs SNK 3 in the Capcom side. I think that people will be very happy to see Cody on the base roster, and I just think that these three classic characters, Sagat, Cody, and Vega, are nice choices to represent the old side of Capcom. And then we have the same dynamic of classic characters, but for the SNK side. SNK also has a ton, I would argue even more, classic iconic characters that need to be on the base roster. For example, we have some slots for characters that were present on KOF 94, like Ralph Jones, Athena Azamiya, and also Benimaru. I think that all those characters deserve a spot in the base roster of the game. They are very classic and iconic characters that need a spot in the start, you know, of a Capcom vs SNK 3 iteration. And then we also have other classic characters from other franchises like Fatal Fury or Art of Fighting, and we also need to add them, like for example Joe Higashi and also Mr. Karate. I think that all those characters need to be in the base roster, and if they are not, it's simply a mistake. They have to be in it. So with that, we basically fill the classic section for both Capcom and SNK, with a little more characters for SNK, but at the end for the full roster it's going to be the same number for both sides. It's just that I think that SNK has older characters that kind of deserve a spot more than maybe all the characters from Street Fighter. Okay, and now we move into what I would like to call the middle section, and this is basically the part of the roster that is a combination of characters from both Capcom and SNK that represent iconic franchises like Street Fighter or the King of Fighters, but the characters are not really classic characters because they were not part of the first entries for those games, but they became famous over time because of other entries for the same franchise. For example, for the Capcom side, I have Rose, Urien, and Makoto. I think that Rose, it's a really good representation for the Alpha series, and we also have Cody on the classic section that is also an Alpha character technically. So those two characters are very good to represent a very specific section of the history of Street Fighter that is very good. You know, the Alpha series was really good. The Alpha games were very fun and really basically high quality for the time. So I think that Rose, it's a good part of that history of Street Fighter and deserves a spot. You know, we deserve a spot for a character that represents the Alpha series. And then we also have Urien and Makoto, which basically represent the history of Street Fighter 3. And the reason why I choose Urien and Makoto for that section of the history of Street Fighter and not maybe, for example, Yun and Yang or Dudley, it's basically because I feel like Urien and Makoto don't have a modern counterpart when it comes to their gameplay. Like, they are very unique characters that don't really have modern representation, at least in terms of a gameplay loop. So I really feel like Urien and Makoto deserve a spot in the base roster of a Capcom vs SNK 3 game. They are very unique, incredibly fun to play, and they are not on Street Fighter 6. So it is a great idea to add them basically to a new game. And people miss them. Like, these characters are very popular and very unique. So I think that they deserve a spot, and they are good representatives for Street Fighter 3. And just so you don't get mad at me, Dudley is going to be DLC and maybe other Third Strike characters, okay? So don't get crazy about it. And then for the middle section of SNK, I'm basically gonna add other iconic characters that are very famous, but they are not really super classic technically, even though they are practically speaking. And these are Blue Mary, Leona, Shermie, and Yashiro. I think that these four characters represent SNK in many ways. Like, Yashiro and Shermie really represent KOF. Like, it really feels like they are some of the public faces of KOF, even though they were not present on KOF 94. And then Leona and Blue Mary, I would say, represent like SNK as a whole. They are not really attached to a game. I feel like even though Leona is only present on KOF, she is still like a public female of SNK, and Blue Mary, it's also an incredibly famous character. She's connected to Terry, which makes her even more famous, and I think that these four characters really deserve a spot in the middle section, you know, in the history section for SNK. They are famous, they are fun to play, unique also to play, like they have very unique gameplay loops, and I feel like they deserve a spot in the Capcom vs SNK 3 era. And well, we have the public faces for each franchise, we have the classics, and we have the middle section, you know, the history of the pre-modern fighting games for each side. Now I want to move into more modern. I think that there is modern characters that deserve a spot because of branding maybe or marketing, but also over time have basically earned, you know, fans' hearts. So I think that maybe they deserve to be in the game. For the Capcom side, I have Yuri, Luke, and Jamie. I think that Yuri, you could argue, is already like a public face of Capcom. She's incredibly famous and popular, and she's already like a classic character, but we are gonna consider her a modern character because at the end of the day, she was part of Street Fighter 4 first. So she needs a spot, like there is no discussion about that. And then I basically have Luke and Jamie as the faces of Street Fighter 6, as the faces of this new era of Street Fighter. I think that Luke is very clearly, you know, the new guy, like Capcom is trying to make him the face of Street Fighter, even though it's probably not gonna happen. But Luke, it's already a popular character and it's kind of a meme, so I'm not mad at him being in the game, and he has to be in the game. Like, there's no world in which a Capcom vs SNK 3 game is not gonna have Luke. And then we have Jamie, and the reason why I added Jamie is because I basically feel like Jamie is the new Yun and Yang. Like in many ways it feels like Yun and Yang are not going to be on Street Fighter 6 because Jamie exists. So I'm kind of sad when it comes to that specifically, but also I love Jamie as a character, and I think that he's the best new character in Street Fighter 6. So I think that he deserves a spot in the Capcom vs SNK 3 roster. And then for the modern section for SNK, I gotta say, like, SNK doesn't really have that many more modern characters that are really famous and actually have a good design. Sadly, over time, the quality of SNK character design has gone down, but I thought of two characters that are kind of modern. They are maybe in the middle section discussion, but I categorize them as modern, that are really cool characters, and that is K-Dash and Kula. I think that they are like the good representation of the middle 2000s for SNK. They are very famous characters that have a decent, you know, or really cool visual design. For me, especially K-Dash. And Kula is a good, you know, like female representative of the modern SNK side. So I think that even though the strongest side of SNK is probably the classic section, still this couple of modern characters are very, very cool, and they deserve a spot in the roster for sure. And now we move into the last section of the base roster, and this is basically what I would like to call characters from other alternative franchises, not from Street Fighter, not from King of Fighters, but that have become insanely popular over the years. And for the Capcom side, I have Morrigan and Dimitri from Darkstalkers. I feel like Morrigan, it's a public face for Capcom, but in many ways, she's kind of like on the shadows because we have not gotten a game in which she's actually part of the roster. So I would like to see Morrigan on Capcom vs SNK 3. She's kind of like a classic character. And then Dimitri, you know, sort of a villain to basically have from the Darkstalkers series. And the last character from the Capcom side that is going to be from maybe a more weird game is going to be Jin Satome from Cyberbots. And basically, you know, everyone knows him for Marvel vs Capcom. I think that Jin solidify himself as a Capcom classic character because of the Marvel vs Capcom games, and he deserves a spot in a Capcom vs SNK game. I think that it makes a ton of sense. So Jin is my last spot for the Capcom side. And then we have the last spot for SNK when it comes to the base roster, and it's not really a surprise, but for me she's kind of like the last section of the discussion because I don't consider her a classic character in the practical sense. She's not as popular as maybe other characters, but she's a character that is old, and it's going to be Nakoruru from the Samurai Showdown series. I think that it's really good to have Nakoruru alongside Haomaru to basically represent Samsho, and it makes a ton of sense. So why would Nakoruru not be on the base roster of the game? I think that it is a great idea. It kind of gives a little wide range to representation of SNK, and it makes a ton of sense. So Nakoruru is the last character of the roster, and now we have 40 characters, 20 for the Capcom side and 20 for the SNK side. So it's time to move into DLC because there is a lot of characters that are not in the game still that deserve a spot for sure. A game like this would probably have very long support from the developers, so I actually did 6 different seasons of DLC, and each season is gonna have 3 characters for Capcom and 3 characters for the SNK side. Season 1 starts very strong, and we're basically gonna add the 3 World Warriors that are the most famous that are not present in the game. So Capcom side, Season 1 is Dhalsim, Blanca, and E Honda. It just makes sense, like why would those characters not be in the final roster for the game as DLC? They just have to be in. And then we have 3 King of Fighters icons that need to be in the game also. Technically 4. The first slot is Mature and Vice as one character. I think that with how hard it is to put all the characters you want on a game like this, it would make a ton of sense to create a rendition of Mature and Vice in which they are one character, and you can basically change in between them and their moveset or something. Like, there's gotta be a way to do it. I think that Mature and Vice get one slot, the 2 of them basically together. Then we have another slot for Hydern. I think that Hydern is a classic KOF character that deserves a spot in the game. And the 3rd slot for SNK on Season 1 is Chizuru. I think that these 6 characters are a very strong start. They are very iconic for both sides and make a ton of sense. So that would be Season 1, World Warriors versus KOF icons. And then we move into Season 2, and Season 2 is basically a mix of characters that you could consider are like tier 2, at least for the Capcom side. And they are very popular and famous, but you would maybe not take them as a priority when you build a roster, but they for sure deserve a DLC spot. And for the Capcom side, we have Alex, Karin, and Poison. I think that these 3 characters have become staples of Street Fighter over time, but they are not really like the first tier characters that you choose to make a roster, but still, they deserve a spot, I would say, on a Capcom versus SNK game. And for the SNK side, it's a little more famous characters, to be honest, and we have Judy Sakazaki, Andy Bogart, and also Clark. I think that these 3 characters are very famous, super iconic, and they basically deserve to be on the first couple of seasons for a Capcom vs SNK 3 game. Like, they really are famous enough and also unique enough in terms of the gameplay. And then we move into Season 3, and it's basically like a Legends Reborn season in the sense that they are all middle of the road characters. They were part of the Alpha series or the Street Fighter 3 timeline, and also some characters from SNK that are very iconic, but they are technically not from the first entries of each game. And for Capcom, we have Sakura, Dan, and also Dudley. I think that this season would break, you know, Capcom lovers' hearts. Like, it's super iconic characters that we have not seen over the last few years necessarily on the games, and at least in the base roster. And they're very fun, very famous. It's just they need to be in the game. And then for SNK side, we have King, Robert Garcia, and T-Sog. I think that this mix of characters is very good. Like, you have very classic characters and also others that kind of like got more famous over time, like T-Sog. And they are not necessarily super new because T-Sog technically appeared for the first time on Mark of the Wolves. So I think that it's a great mix of classic and new, so we create that middle section again of the road in which we revisit characters that deserve a spot but are not necessarily incredibly old characters. And this season is kind of my favorite, I gotta say. It's really cool. Then we move into Season 4, and Season 4 is the boss season. It's basically 6 characters that represent bosses or like alternative versions of characters that were present in Capcom or SNK games over time and are very famous, but they have not maybe made a return necessarily over the last few years in the base roster of games, and they're basically bosses once again. And for Capcom, we have Evil Ryu, Violent Ken, and Shen Akuma. I think that these 3 characters would be really fun to play and probably busted, so I would be very happy to see them on a Capcom vs SNK DLC season. And then for KOF, or basically SNK side, we have Rugal, which we didn't have on the base roster, and I kind of did that on purpose. I wanted to put Rugal as a DLC because I feel like he would sell a lot, and I didn't want to put Akuma as DLC once again. We have also the Orochi. I think that is a very good choice for a DLC, and Krauser. So again, a very nice mix of classic and maybe a little newer characters that are basically bosses or alternate versions of classic characters. Then we move into Season 5, and Season 5 is basically like the cult season. It's characters that you could consider a little weirder, but still relatively popular, and from smaller franchises or characters from a big franchise that are not that famous in comparison to their public faces. For Capcom, we have Sodom, Batsu, and Jada. So we basically have a Final Fight character that was part of a lot of games in the older days. We have Batsu from Rival Schools, a really good addition, I would say, to a Capcom vs SNK 3 game, and Jetta from Darkstalkers, really cool character, deserves a spot for sure also. And the SNK side, we have Kaede from The Last Blade. I think that we really need a Last Blade character on a Capcom vs SNK 3 game. It makes a ton of sense to represent that franchise that might come back in the future, we don't know. Then we have Rick Stroud, that Fatal Fury character that is popular but not. It's kind of weird, it's in the middle section, but it's very iconic for SNK fans. And also we have Angel. I think that Angel is a staple, like it has become a modern staple of SNK, and I didn't add her in the base roster, so she for sure deserves a DLC spot. And then we have the last season, which is kind of optional, like having 6 seasons for a game is kind of insane, but we're gonna add them. And I really like this season actually. It's like modern era fighters that also have like a strong demand and can be fan favorites. For Capcom, we have Sea Viper, Rashid, and also Balrog. I feel like these 3 characters are very famous, and we would be happy if they are a part of any Capcom game, but they're not really always present. I really miss Sea Viper especially. Rashid is kind of a staple already in the modern days, and well, Balrog, I just love Balrog, to be honest. I love that character. And then we have the SNK side with more modern characters. We have Dolores. I think that Dolores was the best new character on KOF 15 personally in terms of visual design. And then we have Shune, but we need a redesign. Like Shune's design in KOF 15, it's awful. We need a new face for the KOF, and I think that Shune can be that if we have a cool redesign for the character. And then we also have a redesign and hopefully a new moveset for Shingo Jabuki. I think that Shingo is a very classic and famous character that deserves a newer identity and like a stronger version of himself in many ways, not just a Kyo clone. So I would love to see Shingo on this game as last season and see them as a new character. And well, that was the video, guys. It was a little longer than usual, but this is a discussion that deserves some time, and we still didn't add a ton of characters that probably deserve a spot. Like I would argue, you know, that for example Yamasaki should be on the game, and I just didn't know when to add him at what moment, but he's in the game. Just assume that Yamasaki is on the game. Then there's a lot of other characters that I would like to see on the game that are not, like Seth, Gil, G, Elena. I would like to see maybe Eagle. I don't know who else. Like also I would like to see, I guess, Whip, maybe Heavy D, Lucky and Brian, Shin, Gensai. Like there are so many characters that didn't have a spot in the game that just maybe needed. And if we ever get a game like this, like if we ever get a Capcom vs SNK 3 game, the roster is probably the biggest challenge. Like it's absolutely insane how hard it is to create a roster that makes sense and that adds everyone. I would say that Yamasaki is probably the biggest miss from my personal list. I would add him and change maybe a character from the SNK side, like Clark. Maybe I would change Clark in the DLC list for Yamasaki, but I don't know, it's super hard. So I hope that you enjoyed the video, guys, and see you on the next one.